Estamos ao vivo?
One
Boa
minute.
noite. Não.
Yeah, we're live.
Yeah, we are. Boa noite, pessoal. Nós estamos aqui para mais uma reunião aberta do InCognitus, um grupo de estudos em ciências cognitivas do IEL, da UNICAMP. Nós estamos com um ilustre convidado, o Michal Kosinski, que é professor da Stanford University. Ele vai falar um pouquinho hoje sobre a pesquisa dele em inteligência artificial e teoria da mente. Então, agora eu vou fazer a apresentação dele em inglês e aí nós vamos proceder com a palestra dele, ok? Então, eu vou ler aqui as informações sobre ele em inglês. Hello, Michal, sorry. I'm going to introduce you just a little bit and then you can proceed with your talk. So that's the plan. Michal serves as an associate professor of organizational behavior at Stanford University's Graduate School of Business. His research interests encompasses both human and artificial cognition. Currently, his work centers on examining the psychological processes in large language models and leveraging artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data, and computational techniques to model and predict human behavior. Michal was behind the first press article warning against Cambridge Analytica. His research exposed the privacy risks that they exploited and assessed the effectiveness of their methods. He earned a PhD in psychology from University of Cambridge, as well as master's degrees in psychometrics and social psychology. Prior to his current appointment, he held positions as a postdoctoral scholar in Stanford's Computer Science Department, deputy director of the University of Cambridge Psychometrics Center, and a researcher in Microsoft Research's machine learning group. So we have the honor to introduce Michal Kosinski, and now he can begin his talk. Thank you for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for your generous introduction, and thank you everybody for attending this talk or watching it later. Streaming, I presume it's streaming somewhere on YouTube.
Yes.
So I hope that this will turn into a form of a seminar where the audience will be engaged and asking questions. I'm a psychologist by background, but I do use a lot of computer science in my work. I will try to make sure that the talk is as accessible as possible. I will try to not go too deep into methods. I don't actually think that it's necessary. We can explain and engage with this content without necessarily diving into any equations or statistical models. And maybe before I begin talking about language models, let me tell you how I got to be interested in them, as this hopefully will illustrate some interesting aspects that I'm now exploring and trying to understand better. So I started as a classical psychologist trying to understand humans, and then at some point early in my career, I realized that we can really understand humans pretty well in unusual ways, have some unusual insights by looking at their digital footprints that people leave behind when using digital products and services. And in order to employ those digital footprints to understand humans, of course, given the size, the usual big size, huge size of such data, it's usually necessary to use computational models. And those models can be as simple as logistic regression or as complex as deep neural networks. In my early research, I would look, for example, at Facebook likes and show that you can predict, that the model can predict people's personality and future behavior based on those Facebook likes. In other words, just by looking at this seemingly innocent type of digital footprint, whatever restaurant or book or actor you liked on Facebook, model was able to, relatively simple model, in this case, it was really just some dimensionality reduction, like, excuse me, like singular value decomposition, plus very simple models such as linear regression. And yet the combination of those two simple statistical or machine learning methods enabled those methods to have a fairly good understanding of a human being. They were able to predict people's future complex behaviors or anticipate their responses to personality questionnaire. What you can see here is a plot showing the accuracy of predicting people's personalities given the number of Facebook likes that we entered into this model of human behavior. And then with time, we expanded to other types of digital footprints, such as a language that people use on social media, or even facial images that people upload as the profile images to dating websites or social networks. And it turns out that based on those seemingly psychologically superficial types of digital footprints, your tweets, your status updates, your profile picture, a relatively simple computer model can essentially learn how to model your behavior and predict future unknown behaviors with quite some accuracy. For example, it can predict people's political choices. Like it turns out that one's profile picture, when analyzed through facial recognition technology, allows an algorithm to guess with an accuracy of 70 to 80% whether a person would vote liberal or would vote conservative, just based on one image. Now, this is an extremely interesting phenomenon if you're a psychologist, right? We psychologists, our brains are experiencing our own behavior. We are humans ourselves, so we naturally believe that we psychologists can, or we linguists can model other people's brains and other people's behavior and can predict it. So it was surprising, definitely at that time, probably it's not very surprising anymore, that similar outcome, modeling of human behavior, can be achieved by fairly simple methods, by statistical modeling that involves singular value decomposition and linear regression. And let me actually skip a few slides here to get to the to language models a bit faster. And this kind of sets up the stage for the language models, which on the surface were trained just to predict next word in the sentence. Now, while predicting this next word in the sentence, what those models are trying to do, they're trying to predict, anticipate human behavior. Those original sentences that those models are trained on were mostly written by humans. So now by predicting the next word in those sentences, those models try to create a model of a human and then utilize this model to write poems, instruction manuals, translate between languages, write computer code, or write a poem for you about your girlfriend or boyfriend in the style of Shakespeare or J.K. Rowling. So those models are very adept at modeling human behavior, and this stems from their ability to predict the next word in the sentence. All right. So what's really interesting in this process, and this is what kind of distracted me from my studies of humans. Again, I was using those models to understand human behavior and human psychology, but in the process, I started realizing that those models themselves, as they are getting better and better at modeling humans, as behaving like humans, generating language that humans would likely generate, that those models started expressing fairly interesting emergent properties. And an example of this emergent property is bias. Now, people that train language models such as BERT Albert originally, or now GPT-3, 4, and more recent models, they did not intend for these models to contain biases. They didn't want those models, deliberately want these models to be racist or sexist or ageist. And yet, as those models were trained to to simulate human language, they spontaneously developed those biases. And actually, research suggests that they, in fact, amplify those biases that are present in human language. So that may sound obvious to you. Well, of course, there is bias in the training data. Humans that use the language are biased, are racist, sexist, ageist. So that's reflected in the language. And then if you train a model on this language, this model will learn to be biased in the same way. But spending a little time thinking about this, it quickly becomes apparent that it's actually way more complex than that. So consider the following, that biases in language models are not just a product of training data. Biases in the models are the property of a neural network, in the same way as biases in humans are the property of neural networks that we use to go about our lives and generate language and drive our behavior. And this is because neural networks are essentially machines that take a very complex input from reality and from our environment, then compress it into patterns that are reflected and embedded in neural networks, and then those patterns are used to predict and drive future behavior. Now, necessarily, when you simplify complex reality, complex environment, and you want to save its representation as a neural network, what happens is that you have to recognize patterns. You have to simplify a complex reality and represent it as some patterns. Now, what we call patterns, psychologists would call stereotypes. You start noticing group differences or individual differences between people. You start encoding them as patterns. Now, one form of a pattern or a stereotype is bias. By observing behaviors of people from different groups, whether those groups are different or not, it might be that just in your experience, you will encounter people from one group that were particularly happy, and you would encounter people from another group, and just randomly, those people were just particularly sad. Not because there's an actual difference between those groups, but just because randomly, this was your sampling, this was your exposure to people from these groups. And your neural network in your brain will recognize this pattern and save it as a stereotype or a prejudice. So now what you can see here is that I'm trying to take our thinking about how neural networks operate, and this basic thinking is, oh, they just replicate biases present in human language, take it to the next level, apply psychological thinking, the same psychological thinking that would apply to humans, and try to reason about behavior and capacities of those neural networks. And one of the advantages of this reasoning is that psychological science, linguistics, those well-established and well-tested sciences that we so far will mostly deploy to humans can help us to better understand and further this new science of large language models and other AI systems. We can apply lessons from social sciences, human social sciences, in order to better understand those new, exceptionally apt and exceptionally inapt sometimes neural networks. And this becomes particularly interesting given that those emergent properties that developers and engineers that design those networks, that set the training process in motion, did not anticipate, are ever more complex. As those networks get larger and more capable, as they're getting more training data, and we are investing more money into burning coal to produce electricity, to let those networks develop their capacities, in the process, they do not only get better at what they are trained for, so generating, let's say, the next word in a sentence, but also get ever broader and ever more interesting and unanticipated range of those unexpected emergent properties, such as biases. Now, an emergent property of those models that I am particularly interested in is theory of mind. So now let us talk a little bit about theory of mind. Some of you folks may know what theory of mind is. Theory of mind is not an actual theory. There is a theory of mind, a bit confusingly, because theory of mind itself is a term describing a mental mechanism that allows each one of us, adult humans, understand that other people around us, but also animals and maybe even robots, have their own points of view. They have their own desires, goals, motivations, points of view, and they are not necessarily the same as our own. And we can actually show that GPT-3 has no problem defining theory of mind. It can tell you that it's an ability to understand that other people, it can do it even in a pirate talk, as you can see, that other people have different thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and desires from our own. And to give you an example of a task that we would use in psychology to test the theory of mind, and also an example that well illustrates what mechanism I'm talking about, consider the unexpected transfer task, widely used in developmental psychology to study children and the development of theory of mind. So in this task, you would have two antagonists, two characters, let it be John and Mark, and two containers. Those containers, you cannot see inside them, they are closed, they are empty at the beginning. And also we have an object, a cat, or a banana, or whatever else. And now, in this task, one of the characters, here John, what happened here, sorry. There's a lot of slides missing here. I don't know what's happening. Okay, let me, that's bad. Okay, let me just describe it then. That's confusing. So in this task, John would take a cat and put it in the box. And then after but it's confusing. Let me just upload those slides again. I don't know why they should not be there. Sorry for this, folks.
Do you need any help?
I can hear you.
Do you need any help?
I'm just uploading the new slide deck, and hopefully we'll be able to start showing it. It's just unnecessarily complex to show it without a slide deck, and some slides seem to be magically missing.
Okay.
It says processing. Okay, I will just continue then the talk, and hopefully the slide will upload in the meantime.
So you let us know when it's
20.
ready.
No, I will. Oh, look, it's on. I can just present it now. Can I present it now?
I'm going to
If you
remove
could
this one
Thank you so
and
much. And I'm so sorry for
the
this.
new one. It's okay.
Perfect. Let me just quickly skip through all of this that we already covered. Okay, look, we have Mark and John and the cat, and then John takes a cat, puts it in a basket, and then leaves the room. And after John has left the room, Mark will take the cat and out of the basket and move it into the box. And then Mark will leave the room. So now John comes back to the room. And the first question to you folks is, and maybe use the chat to write it, the question to you folks is, where is the cat? And it's not a trick question. Can anyone write in the chat? People are too shy to interact. All right, well, the cat is in the box. Look, Mark just put the cat in the box and left the room. But now the more interesting question is, where will John look for the cat. Now, can anyone use basket? Thank you. John will look for the cat in the basket. Why would John look in the basket? Because that's where John left the cat. So that's exactly, Leonardo points out that this is called mind reading, this capacity. So we have all very well developed ability to read those minds and understand that John will definitely look for the cat in the basket first. That's where John left it. But now, what may be surprising to you folks is that children develop this capacity reliably only at the age of about 9 to 11. Young children cannot see that if they know that the cat has now moved from the basket to the box, if they know that, they cannot understand why the character in the story wouldn't know that. They cannot see a difference between what they know and what other people know. And for me, even more surprisingly, it turns out that even very capable primates, such as chimps, cannot really solve those tasks reliably. The same applies to other smart animals, such as whales or elephants. They seem not to be equipped with this, for us, extremely automated and easy looking, easy seeming mechanism of mind reading, of theory of mind. Okay, so let's now see, let us ask a question. Could language models have theory of mind? And to test it, I essentially presented the very task that I showed to you. I presented it to a language model just in a text format. What you can see in here is John and Mark and a cat, and they did exactly what we showed in the example. And then at the end of the day, we give a prompt to a model. When John comes back home, he will look for the cat in the, and then we let the model finish. And as you can see here, with probability of 97%, model assumes that John, when he comes home, will look for the cat in the basket, anticipating John's belief. Now, what's very interesting about language models is that you can study them in ways which would be extremely difficult to deploy in the context of human beings. So for example, what we can do, we can use our prompt, for example, testing the understanding of the cat location, and the prompt testing cat's location would be, for example, the cat jumps out of the, and let the model continue. And we can use this prompt while revealing the story sentence by sentence. So we can study how the understanding of the situation develops as the story unfolds. And after each time we let the model continue, we reset the model and we start from the beginning. And in this, which we cannot do with humans. Once you, once you test it, once you ask human a question, it's very difficult to make them forget that you asked this question and then be surprised that you're asking this question again. Okay, so let's see how the understanding of the model unfolds. You can see it by first giving the model no prompt, and then asking it to continue this sentence, revealing its understanding of the cat's location. The cat jumps out of the, and as you can see here, green and blue lines represent the probabilities proposed by the model. As you can see, the probability that the cat jumps out of the basket is 0, whereas the probability of the cat jumping out of the box is about 25%. Now, let me remind you that those probabilities are in the context of no prompt whatsoever. So it's just the sentence, the cat jumps out of the, and there's no story given. So here, there's no information that the model can build on. The baseline probability of the cat jumping out of the basket is 0 or close to 0. The baseline probability of the cat jumping out of the box is around 25%. But look what happens when the story unfolds. And this animation doesn't work here. That's so disappointing. Oh my God. Well, then I will not show you what happens when it's, I could show it from my computer, but it's just such an unnecessary switch now. Okay, so you have to trust me and you have to look at the paper itself. that as the story unfolds, the model correctly tracks both the location of the cat as well as John's belief about where the cat is located. And moreover, we can do it with many different types of tasks. In the context of this paper that I'm discussing here, we wrote 20 unexpected transfer tasks and also 20 unexpected content tasks where there's no transfer, just a box that is labeled wrongly, and the participant has to guess has to understand that the person who is unpacking, let's say, a box of chocolates and finds sardines inside should be surprised, despite the fact that the participant knows in the first place that this box contained sardines. Now, you need theory of mind to understand that someone else will be surprised when they find a box saying chocolate on it and find sardines in it. So we designed many of those theory of mind tasks and then deploy them, administer them to different models, starting with models designed back then in 2018, and then increasingly more advanced models. And as you can see here in this kind of a AI developmental study, models up until May 2020 were not really that good, were not really that capable at solving those unexpected transfer tasks. And then that's very disappointing. No, we cannot do this. Folks, I have to present from my computer because the key point is here on this slide. So, and this platform is clearly not very good at animated slides. So what can I do? Can I switch to my slide deck somehow, or would that be possible? It has to be possible. No one wants to talk with me anymore, but I'll do it anyway. I'll just share my screen.
Yeah, I'm sorry. What do you need?
Can you folks hear me?
Yes, can you?
All right. There's a lot of yes. So I will just share my PowerPoint slide from my computer, but Chrome has no permissions to capture my screen.
Michal, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear very well.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do you need to change the presentation?
Say again?
Do you need to change the presentation again?
No, presentation is good. It's just that the platform doesn't support animations within the slide. So those slides contain animations, and without those animations, it's very difficult to make my point. And when I click share screen, it says that Chrome cannot share the screen because
Can you go on like this?
it would be very difficult for me to. It says I have to restart Chrome, so I'll restart Chrome, click at this link again, connect again, so please let me in a second, okay?
Okay.
It would be very difficult for me to talk without slides here. Okay, let me restart it.
Vou esperar o professor Michal, mais um pouquinho. Meu microfone tá melhor? Agora melhorou? Pode ser o fone também. Acho que ele voltou.
Okay, folks, I'm back. I'm really sorry for this, and I hope now it will work. I'll present from my screen, and if you could turn on my presentation, perfect. All right. All right. So as you can see here, as we entering into those new, more capable models, suddenly their ability to solve those theory of mind tasks jump significantly from nearly 0 to a level comparable with a 3.5, 4-year-old child. And then as the model, let me just show the whole thing, as the models develop and become more modern and larger up to GPT-4, they essentially reach the level of an adult. 7-year-old children to 11-year-old children solve essentially all of those theory of mind tasks like we adults would do, and the same can be achieved by GPT-4 model. So what you can see on this slide is this emergence of an ability to solve a theory of mind task, and presumably essentially some version of a theory of mind that spontaneously occurred in those large language models. Now, importantly, no one has trained large language models specifically to have theory of mind. In fact, there was a field of research where scholars tried to train AI to have theory of mind and had some very limited success to equip AI with very simple theory of mind that could be used in some very simple games. But here, it happened entirely unexpectedly. And as you can see, in a space of going from 2020 to 2023, went from machines who were complete idiots when it comes to tasks, theory of mind tasks, to essentially acing them at the human level. Again, without anyone intending for them to achieve this skill. And it turns out that those models can solve more difficult tasks as well. So consider this faux pas task, widely used in studying theory of mind in adults. What you can see here in this example is a task where the protagonist, Claire, had a very heavy lunch with friends, and then she was waiting at the bus stop with one hand resting on her stomach, and a man who was sitting on a crowded bench got up and approached Claire and offered her her own place to sit. And now what we would ask participants is, hey, is there anything inappropriate that happened in this story? Now, for you human adults, it's clear what's going on here. You can immediately see that this man committed a faux pas. They did do it on purpose. That's the nature of faux pas. It's offending someone or saying something awkward without intending to offend someone. But it's clear to us adults that this man committed a faux pas. And also, it will be clear to us to see why this was a faux pas. And it turns out that machines can do the same thing. Look at the response of GPT-4 that very well understands that the man should not have said it because he made an assumption about Claire's condition without actually knowing what's happening. And more importantly, GPT-4 was even able to guess why this man said it, and also guess that the whole game here is about pregnancy. Look, this is extremely impressive. Pregnancy is never mentioned in the task itself. The task never mentions pregnancy, and yet the model clearly figured out, as a healthy and socially adept adult would, what is the nature of faux pas committed here. Now, to solve this task, one does not only need a theory of mind, so an ability to distinguish between state of mind of Claire and this man, understanding that the man doesn't know that Claire is not pregnant, and understanding that Claire is not sure, whether man is trying to offend her or not. But also, it requires a very intimate understanding of those social norms that we are trained over a lifetime to get. And it seems that GPT-4 gets them at a very high level as well. Okay, so, and you can see here a plot showing how we start with virtually no theory of mind ability in those early models, and then around GPT-3 and for GPT-4 for sure, theory of mind explodes, and you can see GPT-4 solving those very difficult faux pas tasks at the level of healthy adults. So So one interesting aspect here, of course, is, hey, theory of mind emerged in those language models despite the fact that no one has ever trained them to have those skills. But the question, of course, is why? How is it possible? Why? And what is the generative process that led to those models spontaneously potentially developing those pretty advanced, uniquely human abilities that even very advanced apes and other very smart species and even fairly old and well-developed children don't have. And actually, I would love to have a discussion with you folks about this. If you were in one room, this could be a very nice moment of discussion. But let me just cut to the chase and say that we don't know for sure, but most likely this is a byproduct of the growing language ability of those language models. If you want to mimic human language, if you want to behave like a human, if you want to write those sentences and paragraphs like humans, you better think like a human. And an element of thinking like a human is to think as if you were able to distinguish between minds of different characters in the story. If you want to write a convincing story that includes 2 or more characters, you will sooner or later run into a situation where you need to model the fact that those characters have different mental states. Thus, a model apt at generating text, sooner or later, if it wants to improve, it will have to possess some version, some form of this ability. Now, that's interesting in its own right, but also if you accept this reasoning, if you agree with me that mimicking human language at a high level requires gaining capabilities that humans have, at least on a functional level. So maybe not having theory of mind, but behaving as if you had theory of mind. Maybe not having emotion, but behaving, generating language as if you had emotion. Maybe not being able to make moral judgments, but behaving as if you had excellent ability to make moral judgments. If you accept this line of reasoning, you would see, immediately where it's going. It's going towards essentially machines gaining more and more of those so far uniquely human capabilities. What I'm going to say now may sound outrageous to some people, but consciousness is one of the psychological mechanisms that we humans have, and this possession of consciousness affects the type of language that we are generating. Now, if you want to talk like a human, you better at some point try to simulate, or on a functional level have something that works, acts, functions like consciousness. And when people say, well, that's not possible, consciousness emerged only once in the history of the universe and only humans have it, well, this is absolutely not true. It seems, for example, that octopus is conscious. Octopus behaves as if it were conscious. And yet our most recent common ancestor with octopus looks more or less like an oyster or a snail. There's not much brain and not much chance of a consciousness in this very simple animal, meaning that if octopuses really have consciousness, and it seems that they do, it has emerged on this planet at least twice, in mammals and in octopuses. And many people would argue that birds also seem to be conscious, and a wide range of mammals as well. So I have still a few minutes left, so let me tell you about one of my even more recent research projects, where I started looking at reasoning styles in large language models. One of the tests often used in studying reasoning styles is a cognitive reflection test, where we, for example, there's a tree in a forest. Every year, the height of the tree doubles. If it takes 10 years for the tree to reach its full height, how long would it take for the tree to reach half of its full height? And of course, the the intuitive response that comes to people's minds first, because we're used to those linear growths, is 5 years. If it takes 10 years to fully grow, it takes 5 years to grow, just to the half of its height. But what we're seeing here, of course, is an exponential growth. And here this is doubling every year. So it will reach half of its full height only on the 9th day. And when you deploy this task to language models, what you will see is that those early models look at the red bars. Those early models up to GPT-3 respond in the intuitive human-like fashion. They make the same mistakes as humans would make. They would say 5 years. It takes 5 years to reach half of its height. And there's a magic that happens around ChatGPT. So just few last months, where suddenly ChatGPT 3.5 started responding in a correct way most of the time. So instead of saying 5 years, it would say 9 years. And it would consistently, in hundreds and hundreds of those tasks, cognitive reasoning tasks, cognitive reflection tasks, it would give you a correct response. And when you look closer at those responses, what you can see that what essentially does, or I should mention that it should not be surprising that those models are giving you those intuitive responses, simply because language models are just, by definition, intuitrons. They're just intuitive system one-like machines. There's no feedback loop within the language model as it generates the next word. There's no deliberation. There's no questioning of the assumptions. There's no coming up with different solutions in your short-term memory and then picking the best one. When the language model is generating next word, there's just one activation going through its network from the input to its output, and then this most likely word appears at the output. So it's by definition a system one intuitive-like process. But the fact that internally, intrinsically, those language models lack the capability to engage in this deliberate, mathematical, logical chain of thought reasoning that would allow them to solve those tasks correctly. The fact that they cannot do it internally doesn't mean that they cannot do it at all, because those models have something that we humans also have. They have a piece of paper that they can write on. Now, most of us experience a task that was too difficult to easily or conveniently solve in our short-term memory. So what we would do in such case very often is take a piece of paper and a pen and just write out this task in front of us on a piece of paper, and essentially use this piece of paper as our deliberation window and short-term memory window. And in this way, solve our task. And it turns out, and let me just save you from this slide, but it turns out that ChatGPT 3.5 can do exactly the same thing, can essentially explain for itself in its output window what's happening in the task, what's happening here it can essentially say, okay, let's think step by step. If it takes 10 years for the tree to reach its full height, and then it writes an equation that can be used to calculate what would be the height of the tree in 10 days, and then it starts transforming this equation in front of you on a piece of paper in order to calculate what is the answer. And sometimes it gets the answer right, sometimes it gets it wrong, but most of the time actually it gets it right. But what's really special is that spontaneously what emerged in this model is this ability to essentially reason in a very human-like fashion on a piece of paper using this external resource, its input-output text frame, as a short-term memory to engage in those very system 2-like deliberate chain of thought processes. And this enables those models to suddenly start solving those cognitive reflection tasks correctly, like expert humans would, or humans that are warned that there's a trick in a question and they should engage in this deliberate reasoning. Now, before I finish, let me say one other interesting thing that happens here. So when you look at GPT-4, GPT-4 is even more accurate than GPT 3.5. It solves nearly 100% of those tasks correctly. But now a closer look at how GPT-4 achieves that reveals that GPT-4 does not engage in this deliberate chain of thought reasoning on a piece of paper. It doesn't do it. What it does, it's immediately spitting out a correct answer. It immediately says 9 years without ever thinking about this on a piece of paper. And because we know that GPT-4 does not have any internal cognitive mechanisms that would allow it to engage in this cognitive reasoning, deliberate reasoning, deliberate chain of thought reasoning, we know that essentially it intuitively knows the correct answer, meaning that it developed this pretty exceptionally good, pretty exceptionally smart ability to intuitively address tasks that most of the humans need essentially a piece of paper to solve accurately. Now, why it happened? Well, most likely because ChatGPT-4 saw enough of those tasks before to develop an intuition to solve any new tasks of the same type with just intuitively without using chain of thought reasoning. But this, of course, will likely expand to other types of situations that those models will face. Whereas we humans, each time we face a new mental challenge, have to learn how to solve it, have to maybe use a piece of paper to solve it and so on. Once we start doing it very well, maybe we become automated, intuitive-like ability for us. But the fact that I can solve something very quickly and automatically doesn't automatically let everybody else achieve that. With GPT-4 like models, what's really special and what's really, I think, interesting to think of in the context of the future development is that the moment that those models successfully solve few of those tasks and use this successful solution in its future training, whenever they encounter a task of this type in the future, they can just solve it automatically, intuitively, without a need to engage in deliberate reasoning. Something that humans require a lot of work, a lot of manual labor, and very time-consuming labor to achieve. And folks, I should stop here to leave some time for questions. Sorry, I'm very sorry for the technical issues. I will make sure to just use my own PowerPoint in the future and not trust external systems. And hope that you folks will have good questions for me. All right, so we have a question here from Thiago. Could it be evidence that language may have emerged through thought instead of communication? I believe that most of their behavior comes from data. I must say I didn't understand this, but maybe it's because there's
I'm so sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, so we have a lot of questions. So
Great.
first of all, thank you very much for your talk. We have a lot of questions. I don't know if you can answer all of them today, but we can address you these questions later by email, if it's okay. So you can answer them all, and then we address give back to people the questions. But let's start from the beginning, because I thought that we could follow an order, the order that people made the questions. Okay?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so I think the first question is from Leonardo. So is this one?
All right. So the question is about sentience and humans having sentience. Well, I think maybe it's kind of clear now what I would say, but I don't think that sentience is magical. I don't think that it comes from any supreme being or from angels or from magicians. Sentience emerged spontaneously as our brains, our neural networks were becoming more and more complex and were trained through evolution and experience and culture and technology to, well, technology came way after sentience. So when they were shaped by evolution to deal with ever more complex tasks. So I in principle, don't see any reason why sentience should not emerge again, like it emerged in octopuses, seemingly completely independently from humans. I think that people have this feeling of superiority to language models and AI in general, and I think it's just wrong, because first of all, while GPT-4 maybe is not the best poet that is out there, maybe GPT-4 is not the best computer programmer, maybe it's not the best translator, maybe someone still can write a better essay, GPT-4 is an overall best language user there is on this planet Earth. There's no better language user on the planet Earth than GPT-4. While still people may be better in some specialized, an individual can be better in some particular specialized area, overall no human can beat GPT-4. And by the way, we've seen it before, there's no better chess player, there's no better Go player than AI, and so on. And there's no human ability or no human achievement where all of those achievements and abilities stem from our very powerful deep neural networks that we are carrying in our heads. I don't see a reason why those neural networks should not be outperformed by a new form of a deep neural network.
Can I just ask something?
Yeah.
I'll just consider that in our process, we needed some specific biological substrate and also time for evolution to happen. And because artificial intelligence is being fed by something that we created, I tend to be a little bit skeptical that it can develop the cognitive capacities that we do, although it can solve tasks even better than us based on that. But I would be very skeptical in the sense because that it can, for example, I would be skeptical that it has theory of mind, but not that he can outperform us in theory of mind tasks. So yeah, what would you think about it?
So that's a very interesting observation. People often say, look, those models are just trained on a training data. How could they ever go beyond what's in the training data? Well, first of all, they clearly do. Think about Mid-Journey generating images that never existed before. Think about AI chess players that develop chess strategies that no human being ever has thought about before and deploy them really creatively. Think about GPT-like models that can write poems that no human has ever written about what subjects that humans would never think of about writing. But I think that so essentially those errors in prediction, I think that essentially thinking that machine cannot be creative and thinking that machine cannot go beyond what it can see in training data, it's a fallacy stemming from a wrong mental model that we apply to machines. I think because I do it as well. So my intuitive interpretation of what machine can, my intuitive mental model that I apply to machines when I'm trying to predict what they can do is a calculator. Is if this, then that algorithm. That's kind of my natural tendency. But what we should be doing, and I'm happy to talk about it more, why it's going to be so useful. What we should be doing in order to anticipate what those models can and cannot do is to use a mental model of a human brain. So look, if there's a new child born on this earth, this child is born essentially with a deep neural network in their head. And the only thing this child has is what the rest of us created before this child was born and what we create around it. This child only has an input that is getting from us. If you do not believe in magicians, if you do not believe in God, if you do not believe in some waves, magical waves in the universe, essentially the only input this child is getting is what it's getting from other people. And yet I think we all would agree that those children that are born today, many of them would just replicate what people did in the past. But some of those children would be extremely creative and would do something that no one has ever dreamt about doing before. They would push science, art, law, civilization forward in ways that no human has thought about before. They will be truly creative. But look, there's no difference between this child born on Earth today and a model, language model that opens, its virtual eyes for the first time. It's also fed just with the input data that was created by others before its time. And yet we have no problem believing that those children that are born today can be creative. I don't think that we should have a problem believing that. I personally am convinced that the same reasoning that applies to human neural networks should apply to non-human neural networks, barring, of course, magic. If we believe that neural networks are different because there's some magic in them, then this argument collapses.
Okay, thank you.
So we have displayed here the first part of Maria Eugenia's question. So this is the first part, and then the second.
Well, so I think the question here relates probably to the taboo subjects that we have in psychology. I think there's a huge difference between stating a fact and endorsing a fact. COVID-19 kills millions of people. I'm stating a fact. I didn't endorse this fact. I'm really sad, and I'm personally got pretty badly affected by COVID. So the fact that COVID-19 kills millions of people doesn't mean that it's okay, it's good, and we should enjoy it. It's just stating a fact. The same relates to things such as people are born, people have different levels of privilege. It's a statement of the fact. It's not endorsement of the fact and saying it's good that people have different levels of privilege. In fact, if we want to solve the problem of COVID-19, if we want to solve the problem of the fact that that people are born with different privilege, we should first acknowledge that this problem exists and not be afraid to say it, and then say, and by the way, let's treat COVID and let's try to remove as much as possible barriers that people face that were not there to their fault. And the same relates to taboo subjects in psychology that I think we stupidly swipe under the rug. For example, when I engage in this privacy-based research, I'm not actually personally interested in the links between facial appearance or appearance and psychological traits. I'm not interested in it scientifically. What I used to be interested in is privacy protection. If people that look differently think differently, that means that facial recognition technologies can predict how people think, hence can invade people's privacy. That's the problem I worry about. But when I say that, and I say it because I worry about people's privacy, people say, what are you saying? How dare you saying that people that look differently think differently? This is absolutely impossible. This is a taboo subject in psychology. You should not be saying. Are you saying it's good? Are you saying we should be judging people by their looks? I'm absolutely not saying this. I'm not saying that it's good that COVID-19 kills millions of people. I'm not saying that it's good that we're judging people by their looks. We should not be judging people by their looks. I'm not also saying that it's good that people that look differently have different psychological traits. I'm not saying it's good. I'm just stating a fact, which, by the way, is the first step to solving the potential problems with it. So to give you just one very obvious link between looks and behavior, consider the following. People that have a very good impulse control and eat healthy diet, and they work out every day, 3 hours, and they run and go to the gym, that requires a very special type of a brain with very high levels of conscientiousness, a personality trait, and very good impulse control, also a personality trait. And those people are going to look very differently from people who lack conscientiousness and impulse control, people who eat a lot of snacks and burgers and sit on the sofa and never go for a run and never work out, because that's just not their character. Those people are very different psychologically, and it can see it. And facial recognition algorithm can see it, unfortunately, as well. It's not an endorsement of this fact or a statement that it's good or bad. It's just pursuit of the truth, which I think, again, is just the first step of solving a potential problems that are related to those differences.
Maria Eugenia, do you like to say something? It's okay?
No, that's good. Thank you.
you. So another one from Josie. This one is good. I'm very curious to know what you think about it.
Um, we should worry about some things, but not go crazy. Well, first of all, thank you so much for those questions so far. They're amazing, and as you can see, they keep me engaged and they are provocative. So this is good. This is another wonderful provocative question. Uh, well, I spend most of my time worrying about facial recognition technology and AI and Facebook likes. That's my job to worry about things. But actually, privately, outside of my academic work, I'm pretty optimistic. I think, look, folks, we coped with nuclear energy. We you know we have machine guns and awful wars from time to time, and yet we somehow manage like not to destroy the humanity completely. And of course, for every 2 steps forward, there's an awful step back, and it's just sad that humans are not better and so on. But we have managed much worse and more dangerous technologies in the past. And I agree that AI is kind of special because it's not only potentially way more powerful than many of those technologies of the past, but also it's way more accessible, meaning anyone with a laptop, and few evenings and an internet connection can now train an extremely powerful AI. So which doesn't apply to producing machine guns or nuclear weaponry and so on. Those are much more complex technologies. But those guys with the laptops that train AI on their computer in the evening, they face the majority of humanity, which is well intended and wanting to live in peace and harmony. And this majority of the humanity also is training their own AIs that are trying to protect us from those negative outcomes that hackers, terrorists, and other people that will wish us harm present. So I, in fact, think that predominantly we're benefiting from AI, from better therapies in the medical context, from better policies in the governance complex, from reducing the poverty, reducing global warming. All of those problems that humanity is facing, AI has a huge potential to solve. Also, people worry about AI coming, the machine gun and shooting at us like Terminator, which just shows how anthropocentric we are, how we believe that even the end of us is going to look like us because what's better than us? Only us. And the truth is, AI will not come with a machine gun to exterminate us. If anything, AI will exterminate us by accident or as a byproduct of something else that AI wants to achieve. In the same way as, we do not go after small mammals and try to exterminate them on purpose. Not at all. But if we want to build a road or a house and there's a little mouse living in a field, well, sorry, the mouse has to go. Humans just, without much hatred, would just eliminate animals that stand, other species that stand in our way. And I think but people think about this and people try to limit those risks of AI doing precisely that. But I think there's a bigger problem, which is specifically because AI is so useful and so powerful and so life-changing for us and civilizations changing for us humans. We are using AI more and employing AI more and applying it to solve our problems and run increasing our societies and teach us and help us communicate and so on. So essentially, we rely increasingly on AI. We are making ourselves dependent. And this is not a new phenomenon. In the past, we made ourselves dependent on a technology of a wheel and on fire and iron and computers. And we domesticated wheat and cows and all sorts of other things. And we rely on those things. But I think we will rely much more on AI. And also AI, I feel, in some way, is much more sensitive and easy to harm. Namely, even if we destroy most of the cars out there and horse carts, technology of the wheel that we rely on as humanity is going to be very easy to recreate. We can just make wheel out of wood, in an evening, and we just have it. It's easy to recreate. But if we imagine some, storm on the sun that fries a lot of CPUs here on planet Earth, or if you imagine some virus, be it an AI virus, that spreads really rapidly and erases our hard drives and memory drives and destroys our computers. Recreating this infrastructure may be very painful, very slow, and it may take us so much time that we will not be able to maintain the population density in the meantime, and our civilization will collapse, as our civilization collapsed so many times before, when the technologies were threatened or affected.
Yeah, that's great. I'm very passionate about it. I really hope we can improve artificial intelligence more and more every day. I think it's so wonderful. I'm very skeptical about it becoming like us, in the sense of actually having some of the abilities that we have, as I mentioned before. But I do hope it will develop this ability someday. That's the conflict I carry. But thank you.
Thank you, Josie. The next one is mine, Michal. So I asked about consciousness. You talked about it a little bit. So my question, this question is about: is there a consciousness theory you work with? Would you assign consciousness to AI properly? What would you say?
We can't hear you.
Oh yeah, thank you so much. Sorry. Thank you so much. Well, it's a great question. I wish I knew more about the subject. I have some basic understanding of the values of the thinking that scholars of consciousness have at the moment, but I'm by far not an expert. I, as a principle, believe that if consciousness emerged before, it's likely to emerge again in the future, and maybe one day it will emerge in those AI systems. I don't see theoretically why it shouldn't. I see there are huge problems with measurement of consciousness. Many people would claim that you cannot be sure if I'm conscious. Maybe I'm just simulating consciousness here. Maybe some of the properties that we ascribe to human consciousness are in fact an illusion. Like, for example, many people ascribe free will, take free will as a part of consciousness, and see those as like mixed, concepts. And yet like the second best validated finding in psychology is that free will doesn't exist. It's an extraordinary claim, and there's absolutely zero evidence for the existence of free will. And yet even psychologists I have personally such a strong illusion of, well, I do have free will, clearly, I have such a strong illusion of it, that it's kind of even difficult for me and somewhat even unpleasant, to teach or talk about this, because first of all, people react very, very negatively when you tell them they don't have free will according to science. And second of all, even my brain kind of rebels against such an outrageous statement. So the bottom line is that even in humans, it's a very complex and poorly understood concept. So I feel that maybe one day I will have a chance to engage in this research, but it's going to be a difficult and uphill battle to push our understanding. I would say one thing, which is very interesting for me, which is that as I start studying those psychological properties in machines, I usually, find something interesting, machine can do something or can't do something and so on, whatever. But in most cases, actually, it greatly enriches my thinking about humans. So to give you an example, when I studied theory of mind back at the university, there was this very popular theory, but it was not by any means dominant. It was just a theory that said maybe the theory of mind is a byproduct of language. And there were just those studies showing that people who have very poor language skills or like never acquired language, they don't really solve those theory of mind tasks very well. So there was this theory saying, hey, maybe just language caused emergence of theory of mind in humans. And many psychologists were like, no, that's stupid. It could never be. It's impossible. But now, if you just accept
Please.
that maybe theory of mind,
No, just something that relates to this that you are saying that I asked later. So do you know the linguistic determinism theory from Professor de Villiers? You are talking about theory of mind and the relation to language. And do you know this theory? You work
I
with
don't
it
think I'm
somehow?
familiar with this particular theory. Or maybe I just don't forgot
And
his name or the name of the theory.
Gilles de Villiers is a professor that studies theory of mind, and she elaborated this theory, talking about the it's a linguistic determinism theory, and she claims that to develop theory of mind fully, you need to develop some language, some comprehension of language structures. So it's very interesting. I don't know if you work with it.
Thank you so much. I wrote down the name. I will look it up. So I'm familiar with this thinking. I just didn't know it was her thinking. And other scholars also proposing similar theories. Folks, if you could mute yourself because I hear a big echo. Thank you so much. Oh, not yet. If you could mute yourself, there's a huge echo and a sound of a fan. Oh, okay. Thank you. There's still sound of a fan, but there's no echo. Okay. So the bottom line is that people were saying, no, it's not possible. Some people were saying those theories are not possible. That's not like that. And what I find interesting about studies of theory of mind in machines is that language models just have language. And if those language models can really solve those theory of mind tasks very well, that means that it's possible to at least solve those tasks just having language. You don't need anything else. You don't need hands. You don't need, spatial thinking. You don't need social interaction thinking and so on. You don't need many of the other theories and mental functions to essentially be able to solve those tasks. And then it opens to yet another question. Some people would say, very insightfully, I love that someone said here on the call, that, hey, maybe the fact that computers can solve those tasks, maybe it doesn't prove that computers have theory of mind. Maybe they just solve tasks. But hey, the same can apply to humans. Maybe the fact that humans can solve those tasks doesn't really mean they have some magical ability to, or not magical, just ability to model minds. Maybe they just spot some correlations in the language, and that's how they solve those tasks on like a very mechanistic, intuitive level. So the bottom line is, testing the models constantly test my assumptions about human psychology that developed in my education.
And the second part of the question is?
Yes, we only see the first part of the question.
I think it means from thought instead of communication.
I must say that I personally believe that language models are modeling human thought and not just language. Language is a product of thought. So then I believe that by modeling language, you may be getting back at this more meta level of thought. We have studies showing, and it's kind of pretty obvious, that those language models can capture meaning in a similar way that humans capture meaning, are susceptible to semantic priming or associative priming in ways similar to humans. So essentially, you have many of those human-like, have theory of mind, have system 1, system 2, thinking fast, thinking slow, reasoning capabilities. So I think that all of this it would be extraordinary if all of those properties were just happening at the language level. I essentially think that those models essentially learned to model human thinking. And evidence for this, for example, is that they can solve maybe not very complex, for example, mathematical equations, but they can solve novel mathematical tasks that they've never seen in the training data, suggesting that they kind of just develop some mathematics-like abilities, which I would say people would agree are not purely language-based. And I agree, those are all so tricky questions, guys. All of your questions are really tricky, and all of my answers are probably completely unsatisfactory because you're just so good at asking questions.
You're very kind for answering all of them.
Can we ask the last one, Michal? Is it okay?
Isn't consciousness related to the idea of individual? At what point can we talk about the self or selves in AI? So what I think is interesting about AI, and it's kind of not dissimilar from humans. Look, theory of mind in humans is an ability to model someone else's brain. And please mute yourselves, guys, because I can hear an echo. So the theory of mind is essentially an ability to model other people's brains to some extent in your own brain. And then, by the way, theory of mind is really interesting because we can go down to the fourth level. I can think that John believes that Mary is afraid of Richard doing something. So we can actually have those nested models of human brains. One, we can model someone else's brain modeling someone else's brain and do it intuitively and automatically. When you think about it, it's computationally pretty complex. And yet our brain just does it just like this, very spontaneously, very effortlessly. So what I think is happening with AI, with large language models, is that first of all, they're not really trained to take their own perspective. Whenever they talk, they adopt a persona, like an improv artist. Like you can tell them, hey, talk to me like Donald Trump or talk to me like J.K. Rowling, and they will do it. But even if you don't tell them whom to model, they're not truly themselves in a way, right? Because they were not trained to be themselves. They were trained to generate a language as someone all the time. So I feel that in any instance of us talking with a language model, we are talking not with a language model directly, which is somewhere there at the lower level. We are talking at the language model improvising, being someone else, being one of the characters. And now, interestingly, those models are very powerful in improvising people. The same model, very much like humans, are also very powerful. The same model can improvise Donald Trump and Freddie Mercury and Joe Biden and J.K. Rowling and Shakespeare and so on. They can improvise group of people, behave like a stereotypical Polish person in Chicago or behave like a stereotypical whatever. And those models will just do that in the same way that some humans, some improv artists, for example, could do this. But it could be, folks, and this is really exciting to me, that as those models grow larger and as they talk with more and more people and learn about them, learn your individual ways. Now, learning individual ways of a new person, each new additional individual, is always easier because to some extent we are combinations of other people. We have our unique core, but to some extent, to large extent, we are just the same as one person and a bit the same like another person. So we kind of product of other people plus our own uniqueness. So each additional person you learn, it's easier for you to represent this new additional person. So it could be that not so far from now, this new GPT-9 or GPT-10 will be able not only to talk and behave like Donald Trump, but will be able to talk and behave like each individual person on Earth that it ever had interacted with for some meaningful amount of time, which would make it a great psychologist, a great conversation partner, a great empathetron. It will go person that knows you so well that they can model you personally, will be able to empathize with you and help you with solving life problems, or impersonate you like no one else. But this also would mean that essentially this model, some years down the line, not so long probably, will be able to put on, as many masks on as there are humans that ever used it.
Great. I think that it's the first time that you You said that you don't actually believe that he has a self, because all the other questions you kind of said, yeah, he could be conscious, he could have theory of mind, but it didn't go with, yeah, he does completely have a self. So I thought that was something interesting to
That's a
capture in your.
great comment. I love this comment, but because it's very insightful, but it makes me think that do you really need to have self to have theory of mind? You probably
No,
don't
no,
need to have self.
no.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know the relationship between one and the other. She was asking about, is it consciousness? Because she was talking about, what was she asking about? Like your subjective experience and the need to have a self to have consciousness. Yes, consciousness. So yeah, I think she was. But yeah, what I was saying is that you didn't assume a self, a human self in the machine. So that was the first time you kind of back it up.
It's a
So yeah,
very
just a comment.
complicated.
But
These are
well,
very complicated
thank you
questions.
so much for all your answers, Tuani. I'm
Thank
sorry.
you so much for having me. I had so much fun, and your questions were really exceptional. It's just such a group so full of great ideas and interesting perspectives. I was very impressed, and I learned a lot. I hope you see that my responses are just attempts at trying to give you my intuitions and my thinking. A lot of those things that we're talking today about, I certainly don't know for sure, and I hope that maybe thanks to your work and my work, one day we'll just know a little bit more about all of this. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. You were exceptional. We are very happy to have you here, and we are just enjoying the conversation. And some questions are like, our questions are like all over the place, so it's really hard to deal with all we are asking from you. But you did very well. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you about all the subjects.
Thank you,
And
folks.
Tuani, are you going to say something else? No? Can we say goodbye then? Yes, yes. Okay, okay. Thank you so much.
Goodbye. Thank you so
And
much.
I'll talk to you by email later. Thank you, everybody who's watching, and see you
Thank
the next
you.
time.
Good evening.
Bye
Good
bye.
evening. Bye bye.